Right. Let's jump into a story you probably heard a bunch of times. Cain and Abel. We're going to really break it down today, going deep with Ellen G. White's thoughts on it from her book, Patriarchs and Prophets.
Yeah, it's one of those stories, seems pretty basic at first, but when you really dig in, it's like this whole mirror of the good versus evil thing that's been going on forever.
Totally. And in this chapter, Cain and Abel tested, White really gets into that. Right from the start, she frames it like this isn't just about two brothers, it's humanity's first big test after that whole Garden of Eden thing.
Right. Adam and Eve, they kind of blew it, but now it's their kids, right? They got to make that choice, follow God's rules, or do their own thing.
And the offerings they bring, that's where it gets really interesting. Abel brings a lamb, which, points right to Jesus' sacrifice later. But Cain, he brings fruit, stuff he grew himself.
And that's what makes it deep. It's not like Cain just brought the wrong thing. White digs into his head, It's like he thought he could just work hard and God would be cool with it.
It's so us, though, right? I know I try to show off to God, prove myself with what I do. It's like, look what I accomplish.
Happens all the time. But White's saying God doesn't care about that show-off stuff if your heart isn't in the right place. It's about that deep down faith, knowing that you need something bigger than yourself to be right with God.
So Cain, it was like a deal, right? Yeah. Here's my offering. Now you got to bless me.
Exactly. And White says that's why God wasn't feeling it. It wasn't true worship. He wasn't admitting he needed God's grace,
But Abel, he got it. He knew he couldn't earn it, needed a savior, and his offering showed that.
Totally. He understood how serious sin was, that you needed forgiveness, atonements. It's like a preview of Jesus' sacrifice, that whole thing that would fix things between God and people.
This is heavy stuff. But here's where it gets juicy, straight from White. Cain flips out, not just at Abel, but at God, too, for not liking his offering.
And White points out he's mad because he can't admit he's messed up. So focused on what he did, thinks he's so righteous, can't accept God saying, nah, not good enough.
So it's deeper than just being jealous of Abel.
Oh, yeah. White says it's pride. Cain's not humble enough, Doesn't want to do things God's way.
Whoa, that's a big statement. Pride can be a real trap. Makes you blind to your own issues, then boom, bigger problems.
Yeah.
But how does White tie this to Cain actually, killing his brother?
Yeah. She doesn't shy away from the dark side of the story. All that anger in Cain, it just festers. Then, bam, explodes into this horrible violence.
So the first murder ever, and White says it's because Cain rejected God, chose to be all self-righteous.
Right. It's like a scary example, Shows you where that pride and not accepting God's grace can lead. And get this, White keeps going, talks about Cain's kids, his whole lineage, and how they keep messing up too.
Wait, so it goes beyond just Cain and Abel now.
Oh yeah. White uses this story to talk about good and evil throughout history. It all starts with that choice. Be humble before God, or be like Cain, trying to do it all yourself.
Man, I'm hooked. Tell me more about these descendants.
Well, Cain's descendants, they weren't exactly saints, according to White. They kind of took everything that was wrong with Cain and just ran with it.
So it's like they inherited his bad vibes or something.
It's more like, well, White paints this picture, They were good at all the wrong things, like fighting, hurting people, just indulging in all kinds of pleasure. Even made musical instruments, but for, well, let's just say not for church.
Okay, wow. Not exactly singing hymns then. But wait, is White saying they were born bad, it was their destiny to be evil because of Cain?
It's tricky. She doesn't say they were born evil, more like they chose to follow Cain's path. Remember, Cain's whole thing was saying no to God, relying on himself.
Right, like building his own little kingdom, his own rules.
Exactly. And White says his descendants did the same thing, but on a bigger scale. They built cities, had kingdoms, all that, but they don't care about God or his rules.
So maybe not all murderers, but definitely living by that whole Cain way of thinking. Self-reliance, worldly success, that kind of stuff.
You got it. And White uses their story as a warning. It's like she's saying, listen, you can achieve big things, right? But if you leave God out, it all just leads to bad stuff, emptiness,
Makes you think. How do we define success today? Are we so caught up in getting ahead, getting rich, that we forget about the spiritual stuff, kind of like Cain's crew?
Definitely something to consider. White's saying true success, real happiness, it only comes when God's first, when you realize you need him and live by his principles.
But hold on, didn't God have mercy on Cain? Even after he did, what he did?
Give him a chance to change.
Right,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Dwight, she emphasizes that God's mercy, it's for everyone, even those who messed up bad. She describes how God marked Cain, not to curse him, but to protect him, so no one would take revenge. So even in this super dark story, there's hope. God doesn't give up on Cain, even though Cain went down a terrible path.
Exactly. And that brings us to the heart of this story. It's not just about Cain and Abel. It's about us, the choices we make.
So are we walking like Abel, trusting God, asking for his guidance? Or are we falling into that Cain trap, trying to do it all on our own, all puffed up with pride?
That's the question White wants us to think about. She's not just telling an old story, she's showing us who we are, making us check ourselves and make sure we're not making the same mistakes.
It's like she's saying, hey, this isn't just some story, it's happening inside each of us.
Right. And the choices we make, they don't just affect us, they affect others too. Like Cain's choices brought darkness and destruction, but when we choose Abel's path, we can bring light and healing to the world.
This is blowing my mind. I never thought about this story having such a huge impact on, well, everything.
That's the power of White's writing. She takes this simple story and shows us how deep it is, how it matters to us today. It's like she's saying, pay attention, this old story can teach us about what it means to be human and how we relate to God.
Okay, so we've talked about Cain's bad choices and what happened because of them. But what about the other side? What does White say about choosing Abel's way? Faith and being humble.
Well, that's where the real hope is. White says that when we trust God, when we know we need his grace and live how he wants us to, it changes everything.
So it's not just about not doing the bad stuff Cain did. It's about going after something better, something more meaningful.
Exactly. White talks about it as a life of peace, real purpose, true joy. It's not about trying to get God to like us. It's about experiencing his love and grace and letting that change us.
That sounds amazing. But how do we actually do that? How do we take those lessons from Cain and Abel and make them work in our lives?
Well, White gives us some practical advice in the chapter. She talks about praying, studying the Bible, and being around people who help us grow in our faith.
So it's not just about having good intentions. It's about working on our relationship with God, asking for his guidance in everything we do.
Exactly. And she also says being humble is super important. She reminds us we can't do it all on our own. We got to admit our weaknesses, that we need God's grace, and be willing to do things his way, even when it doesn't make sense to us.
That's hard. It's so easy to think we've got it all figured out like Cain.
It is. But White says real strength comes from knowing we need God and doing things his way. That's how we find real freedom and purpose.
So even though this story starts with a murder, White ends up giving us hope. It's like she's saying, yeah, we messed up, but God's still showing us how to get back to him, how to experience real life.
You got it. It comes down to that one choice. Do we go Cain's way, all about ourselves and our pride? Or do we go Abel's way, with faith and humility?
That's a powerful way to look at it. It shows us that this isn't just some old story. It's a message that speaks to who we are, who we choose to be. It's like we're at this fork in the road. And we got to pick a direction. Like, do we build our lives on that pride thing, trying to do it all ourselves like Cain? Or do we choose to be humble and let go like Abel?
And here's the thing. White doesn't say it's a one-time choice. It's like this daily battle. Those two ways of thinking always fighting inside us.
Oh, so it's not like make one big decision and you're good. We're always being tested, having to choose between those two paths.
Exactly. Just think, how many times a day could we be selfish and proud or choose to be humble and kind?
Oh, man. All the time, right? Like, someone cuts me off in traffic. Do I just lose it and honk the horn? Or let it go? Maybe they didn't see me.
Or in relationships, right? Do we try to control everything, or do we try to understand and actually be there for the other person? Those little choices, White says, they show that whole Cain and Abel struggle we have inside.
Like we're carrying those two brothers around with us everywhere.
And White says, if we pay attention to those choices, if we try to be more humble and faithful, we can actually change, become more like Abel.
So it's not just about avoiding the bad stuff, but actually wanting a better connection with God, letting that change how we live.
Right. And White says that's what brings real peace and happiness. It's not about success and stuff. It's about doing what God wants and letting his grace, his love change us.
That's really powerful. It's not like we have to earn God's love. It's about accepting it, letting it work on us from the inside out.
And that change, White says, it goes outward too. It's not just us. It's like Cain's choices, they brought darkness. But our choices, if we're like Abel, can bring light and healing to the world.
So it's not just about being good for ourselves. It's about sharing God's love with everyone, making a difference,
Exactly. And that's what White wants us to remember. The story of Cain and Abel, it's not just some old story. It's like a wake-up call to choose humility, faith, love, to bring hope to a world that needs it so bad.
Man, that's heavy. So what's the takeaway? It seems like White is saying that this fight between good and evil is not just some idea, it's happening in our lives every single day.
And every choice we make, even the small ones, they matter. They shape our lives and the lives of everyone around us. By following Abel with faith and humility, we connect with God's grace and become like bringers of healing and hope.
Wow, this deep dive has been amazing. I can't believe how much we got out of this story. I thought I knew it already.
That's the cool thing about these timeless stories, you know. They always speak to us because they're about what it means to be human, our desire for meaning, purpose, and connecting with something bigger than ourselves.
Thanks for taking us through Cain and Abel Tested from Patriarchs and Prophets. It's amazing how these old stories still have so much to say to us today.
Anytime. Until next time, keep searching, keep asking questions, and keep digging deep.
And remember, it's our choice, Cain or Abel. Which path will you choose?